Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Diversity of Plants Zone. Before starting my today's video, I request you all to please subscribe my YouTube channel. Today's topic of my video is about introduction to George Bentham. So let's start the video. George Bentham. George Bentham was born on the 22nd of September in 1800 and he died on the 10th of September 1884. So he was an English botanist described by the weed botanist Devon as the premier systematic botanist of the 19th century. Born into a distinguished family, he initially studied law but had a fascination with the botany from an early age, which he soon pursued, becoming president of the Linnean Society in 1861 and a fellow of the Royal Society in 1862. He was the author of a number of important botanical works, particularly Flora. He is best known for his taxonomy classification of plants in collaboration with George Dalton Hooker. His genera Plantrum, the time period was 1862 to 1883. He died in London in 1884. George Bentham, as shown in the figure. Biography includes the date of birth. So he was born on the 22nd of September 1800 in Stoke, Plymouth in England, and died on the 10th of September 1884 at the age of 83 in London, England. Nationality English. Spouse Sarah Jones. Awards: Royal Medal of the Royal Society in 1859, Clark Medal of the Royal Society of New South Wales in 1879. Scientific career includes the fields like botany. Institutions: Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. Author abbreviation Botany, Bent. Next I am going to discuss about his life. Bentham was born in Stoke, Plymouth on the 22nd of September in 1800. His father, Sir Samuel Bentham, a naval architect, was the only brother of the Jeremy Bentham to survive into the adulthood. His mother, Mary Sophia Bentham, was a botanist and author. Bentham had no formal education, but he had a remarkable linguistic aptitude. By the age of 7, he could speak French, German, and Russian, and he learned Swedish during a short residence in Sweden while still a child. The family made a long tour through France, staying 2 years at Montauban, where the Bentham studied Hebrew and mathematics in the Protestant theological school. They eventually settled near the Montpellier, where the Sir Samuel bought a large estate. While studying at the Angoulême, Bentham came across a copy of A.P. de Cando's Flore Française and became interested in the analytical tables for the identification of the plants. So he immediately tested them on the first plant he saw. The result was successful and he applied it to every plant he came across. In London in 1823, he met the English botanist. His uncle pushed him to study law at the Lincoln's Inn. He was called to the bar and in 1832 held his first and only legal brief. However, his interest in botany never flagged and he became secretary of the Horticultural Society of London from 1829 to 1840. In 1832, he inherited the property of his uncle, Jeremy Bentham. Having inherited his father's estate the previous year, he was now sufficiently well off to do whatever he wanted, which was botany, jurisprudence, and logic. Bentham married Sarah Jones in the time period of 1798 to 1881, daughter of the Sir Hufford Jones Bridges on the 11th of April 1833, and they didn't have children. Bentham died at his London home on the 10th of September 1884 at the age of 83. He was interred in Brompton Cemetery. Next I am going to discuss about his career, which includes the views on the evolution. Bentham's life spanned the Darwinian Revolution, and his young colleague Joseph Dalton Hooker was Darwin's closest friend and one of the first to accept the Darwin's ideas. Until then, Bentham unquestioningly believed that species were fixed. In 1874, he wrote that 15 years have been sufficed to establish a theory of evolution by natural selection. Bentham's conversion to a new line of the thought was complete and included a change from typology in taxonomy to an appreciation that we cannot form an idea of a species from a single individual, nor of a genus from a single one of its species. We can no more set up a typical species than a typical individual. Next, I am going to discuss about his honors and awards. Bentham was awarded the Royal Medal of the Royal Society in 1859 and elected a Fellow in 1862. He served as President of the Linnean Society of London from 1861 to 1874. He was elected a foreign honorary member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1866. He was appointed CMG Companion of the St. Michael and St. George in 1878. His foreign awards included the Clark Medal of the Royal Society of New South Wales in 1879. Next I am going to discuss about his works. Bentham's first publication was his catalogue De Plantes Indigènes de Pyrénées et du Pays Languedoc, Paris 1826, the result of a careful exploration of Pyrenees in company with the G.A. Walker Arnott in the time period of the 1799 to 1868, afterwards professor of the botany in the University of the Glasgow. In the catalogue, Bentham adopted the principle from which he never deviated of citing nothing at second hand. This was followed by articles on various legal subjects on the codification, in which he disagreed with his uncle, on the laws affecting the larceny, and on the law of the real property. But the most remarkable production of this period was the outline of a new system of logic with critical examination of Dr. Wakeley's Elements of Logic, 1827. In this, the principle of the quantification of the predicate was the first explicitly stated. This Stanley Jevons declared to be undoubtedly the most fruitful discovery made in the abstract logical science since the time of the Aristotle. Before 60 copies had been sold, the publisher became the bankrupt, and the stock went for waste paper. The book passed into the oblivion, and it was not till 1873 that Bentham's claim to priority were the family vindicated against those of Sir William Hamilton by the Herbert Spencer. In 1836, he published his Labiatum Genera a Species. In preparing this work, he visited Between 1830 and 1834, every European herbarium several more than once. The following winter was passed into the Vienna, where he produced his Commentation de Leguminosarum generibus, published in the Annals of the Vienna Museum. In 1842, he moved to the Pontrellas in Herefordshire. His chief occupation for the next few years was his contributions to the Prodromus Systematis Naturalis Regni Vegetabilis, which was being carried on by his friend A. P. de Candolle. In all these dealt with some of the 4,730 species. In 1844, he provided the botanical descriptions for the botany of the voyage of the HMS Sulphur. The editor, Richard Brinsley Hinds, has been surgeon on the HMS Sulphur 1835 to 1841 while she explored the Pacific coast of the Americas. In 1854, he found the maintenance of a herbarium and library too expensive. He therefore offered them to the government on the understanding that they should form the foundation of such necessary aids to research in the Royal Botanic Garden, Kew. At the same time, he contemplated the abandonment of the botanical work. However, he yielded to the persuasion of the Sir William Jackson Hooker, John Lindley, and other scientific friends. In 1855, he took up his residence in London and worked at Kew for 5 days a week, with a brief summer holiday from this time onwards till the end of his life. In 1857, the government sanctioned a scheme for the preparation of a series of floras or descriptions in the English language of the indigenous plants of British colonies and possessions. Bentham began with the Flora Hongkongensis in 1861, which was the first comprehensive work on any part of the little-known flora of China and Hong Kong, including the Hong Kong croton. This was followed by the Flora Australiensis in 7 volumes. Time period was 1863 to 1878, the first flora of any large continental area that had ever finished. His greatest work was the Genera Plantrum, begun in 1862 and concluded in 1883 in collaboration with the Joseph Dalton Hooker. His most famous work, however, was the Handbook of the British Flora, begun in 1853 and first published in 1858. This was used by students for over a century, running into many editions. After his death, it was edited by Hooker and was known simply as Bentham and Hooker. He is most famous for his extensive and excellent classification of plants, especially angiosperms, along with Hooker, forming the Bentham and Hooker system, which was published in 3 volumes as Genera Plantrum between 1862 to 1883. Next, I am going to discuss about the selected publications on the distribution of the monocotyledonous orders into primary groups, more especially in reference to the Australian flora, with notes on some points of the terminology. Journal of the Linnean Society of London, Botany, 1588, 490 to 520, February 1877. Genera Plantrum ad exemplaria imprimis in Herbarius Cuvensibus Savata, definite 3 volumes, London, L. Reeve and Co., 1862 to 1883. Outline of a new system of logic with a critical examination of Dr. Wakeley's Elements of Logic, London, Hunt and Clark, 1827. ISBN 9780598395641. The Botany of the Voyage of HMS Sulphur under Captain Ed Bulger. The Botanical Descriptions by the George Bentham, Text Lords, Commissioners of the Admiralty, 1846 by the Smith Elder and Co. The standard author abbreviation Benth is used to indicate this person as the author when citing a botanical name. This is further explanation about the George Bentham. George Bentham was the third child and second son of the Samuel Bentham and Maria Sophia Fordyce. His father, Inspector General of Naval Works, was ennobled in 1809. His mother was the eldest daughter of the Dr. George Fordyce and Fordy, F.R.S., a noted physician. Jeremy Bentham, the well-known authority on the jurisprudence and ethics, was his uncle. Bentham's early education was rather sporadic, largely because of the pre-pathetic family life, and was provided mainly by the private tutors. During his father's tour of duty in the St. Petersburg from the 1805 to 1807, his precocity was evidenced in the ease with which he acquired conversational proficiency in Russian, French, and German, and a knowledge of Latin later in France. Bentham attended the Faculty of Theology at Montauban, where he studied the French and Latin literature, natural philosophy, mathematics, and Hebrew, while indulging his taste for music and drawing. Later in life, he was able to read the botanical works in 14 languages, and it is a tribute to his industry, concentration, and high powers of reception that he did so largely by his own efforts. He first became interested in botany at the age of 17 during travels in France, where he and his parents lived for 11 years. It was the encouragement of his mother, who was an accomplished gardener and a knowledgeable botanist, and access to her copy of the Alphonse de Candoille's Flore Française, whose analytical keys for the identification of plants appealed to his orderly mind, that fostered a penchant for systematic botany, which became his consuming interest for over 50 years, and to which he made outstanding contributions. It was at Montauban that Bentham made his first dried specimens and thus began a herbarium which, through his own collecting, purchase and gift, amounted to over 1 lakh specimens when he gave it to Kew in 1854. Throughout the course of his studies, he consistently worked at botany during his limited leisure time. He made his debut as a botanical author in November 1826 with publication in Paris of his catalogue des plantes indigènes de Pyrénées et du Bas Languedoc, as further testimony to his precocity and breadth of the intellectual achievement. In 1827, he published the outlines of a new system of logic, of which only about 60 copies were sold. The rest, owing to a financial crisis at the publisher, were disposed of for waste paper. Bentham studied law at the Lincoln's Inn, and in November 1831 was called to the bar. However, in 1833, possessed of adequate wealth inherited from his father and his uncle, he determined to give up the legal profession for botany. On 11 of April 1833, Bentham married Sarah, daughter of the Harvard Bridges, one-time British envoy to Poya. They had no children. Bentham received many honors in recognition of his scientific achievements. In 1828, he was admitted as a Fellow of the Linnean Society, of which he became president in 1861. In 1863, he was elected FRS, having been awarded the Society's Royal Medal in 1859. He received the LL.D. from Cambridge in 1874, and 5 years later was admitted to companionship of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. From 1829 to 1840, he was an extremely energetic and conscientious honorary secretary of the Royal Horticultural Society, and with John Dingley steered its affairs through a very critical period. Bentham corresponded with the most of leading botanists of the day and gave unstinting help to the many who requested it. His first major work, which appeared between 1832 and 1836, was Lebiatrum genera, a species, a masterly treatment of the very important family, and in 1848, at the request of Condell, he contributed a revision of the group for the classic Prodromus. Subsequently, he made additional contributions to his fundamental work once his collections and library were amalgamated by a generous gift in 1854 with those of the hookah at Kew. Bentham was given special facilities to continue his research in the years of the intense effort which followed. Some of his greatest taxonomic publications were produced. The genera plantarum, the time period was about 1862 to 1883. In every respect, the fulfillment of complete collaboration with the Joseph Dalton Hooker was the culmination of his scientific career. This monumental synthesis was based on the critical analysis of the material in the Kew Herbarium and Gardens, and is a masterly and meticulous extension of Condell's system. Bentham was one of the most unassuming of always regarding himself as an amateur and reluctant to accept any honor, yet a man who in his lucid, concise and accurate writing did immense service to the systematic botany. This is further explanation about the Bentham George. The time period was 1800 to 1884. George Bentham, the time period was 1800 to 1884. Botanist was born on the 22nd of the September 1800 at Stoke, Hampshire, England, the second son of the Sir Samuel Bentham, naval architect, and Mary Sophia, eldest daughter of the Dr. George Fordyce, FRS, in 1805 to 1807. The family lived at the St. or St. Petersburg, then moved to England, and in 1814 began a leisurely tour of France. At Angoulême, Bentham first became acquainted with botany when he successfully identified a plant by using his mother's copy of de Condell's Flore Française. At Montauban, he was enrolled in the faculty de theology, but his interest included Spanish music, drawing, and dancing, and natural history. For some years, he managed his father's estate near Montpellier, and in 1825 he went to London, where he met the several important botanists, including the Robert Brown, then busy with the collections bequeathed to him by the Sir Joseph Banks. Dear Bentham had probably his first sight of the Australian plants and particularly admired Brown's Drosera specimens. In Glasgow, he met Sir William Hooker and George William Arnott with a whom he later visited the Pyrenees. Bentham's catalogue, De Plantes Indigènes des Pyrénées, was published in 1826. After the French estate was sold, the family returned to England. Bentham assisted his uncle, Jeremy Bentham, edited his father's paper on naval administration, and then entered Lincoln's Inn. He was called to the bar in 1831, but never practiced. In 1826, he had been elected a Fellow of the Linnean Society. He became its president in 1861, but grew autocratic in the chair, and in 1874 vacated it in the resentment when a ruling was outvoted. In 1829 to 1840, he was secretary of the Royal Horticultural Society. In July 1830, Brown proposed his name to the Royal Society, but Bentham withdrew in the November in support of scientific members who resented the election of the Duke of Sussex as president instead of the Hosho. He didn't come forward again for the election until 1862. Bentham's first major botanical work, Labiatum genera, a species, appeared between 1832 to 1836. On the 11th of April 1833, he married Sarah, the youngest daughter of the Sir Harford Bridges, and his wife Sarah Nee Good, widow of the Richard Wycombe. They lived in London for 2 years before moving to the Pontrillas in Herefordshire. By 1854, the growing cost of his herbarium and library led him to offer them to the government on condition they were housed at Kew and made available for consultation by visiting the botanist. When this was arranged, he was persuaded by Sir William Hooker not to abandon his own work. Bentham moved with his wife to London and worked at Kew, writing up his notes each evening in a form ready for the printer. Apart from the numerous contributions to botanical literature, Bentham was particularly associated with the preparation of the first of the famous Kew series of the colonial floras, Flora Hongkongensis in 1861 and Flora Australiensis, 7 volumes, 1863 to 1878. The manuscript of which was completed in 1870. The original plan to bring the Ferdinand Muller to the London to prepare the Australian flora won no support from the Colonial Office, and Bentham undertook this task. He later wrote, with the assistance indeed, but not the cooperation of the Baron von Muller, this assistance being of the precisely the same description as that which I derive from the herbarium and notes of A. Cunningham, from the rich herbaria of Kew, from the published works of the Hookers and others who had worked in the herbarium. In the case of the Baron von Muller, however, the extreme liberty with which he gave up in my favor his own projects for a journal, Flora of Australia, and the great value for my purposes of the very numerous specimens of each species which he had collected into the Melbourne Herbarium, the whole of which he unreservedly lent to me, seemed to me to demand a special recognition in the title page of the Flora, which has thus been misconstrued into an indication of the corporation. Miller's side of the story is told in the M. Willis By Their Fruits, A Life of the Ferdinand von Muller, Sydney, 1949. Flora Australiensis, still a classic, was the first to cover any large continental area and one of the very few entirely written by one author. It represents a prodigious intellectual effort never equaled. Taken with his other major work, Genera Plantarum, 3 volumes in the time period of 1862 to 83, done in collaboration with the Joseph Dalton Hooker, it is all the more remarkable because of Bentham's age. It was his last in lonely retirement. He returned to the autobiography he had begun years before to read aloud to his wife until just before she died in 1880. It was based on his unpublished diaries in 1830 to 83, with a final entry, "My pen here came to grief after more than 28 years of constant and exclusive use." With that pen he had written the entire manuscripts of his major work. He died on the 10th of September 1884, childless. Bentham led through the great change from the domination by the private botanist with his own financial resources to acceptance by the government of the responsibility for national scientific collections. The Banksian and Brownian herbaria remained the property of Robert Brown until his death in 1858, when they were bequeathed to James Bennett, though they remained at the British Museum. Sir William Hooker's library and herbarium at Kew remained his private property, but 11 years after his death in 1865, the government prevented its dispersal through sale by the auction. The question of a national herbarium financed by the government came to a head with the erection of new British Museum buildings in South Kensington, when the rival claims of Kew and the British Museum to be the main repository were widely canvassed. Bentham strongly supported the claims of the Kew before a royal commission in 1871, and in January 1873 was a signatory to a memorial to W.E. Gladstone. His own diaries, autobiography and papers remained at the Royal Botanical Gardens, Kew. Bentham was tall, of slender build. Known to his friends as a delightful companion, he grew increasingly reserved in later years, and younger botanists came to regard him as cold and autocratic. His comments could be scathing on work or views which he didn't approve. Among his honors were an honorary LL.D. Cantab, 1874, a Royal Medal in 1859, the CMG in 1878 for the services to colonial science after the publication of Flora Australiensis, and the Clark Medal of the Royal Society of New South Wales in 1879. Portraits at the Linnean Society include one by the Laws Dickinson, painted in 1870 and presented in February 1871, and a half-length watercolor when Bentham was 10, and a full-length watercolor at 34 by the LeBlanc, both presented by the J.D. Hooker. If you like my video, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much for your time and appreciation.